Welcome back to Fantasy and Faith. Today my guest is Emily H. Wilson, author of the Sumerian Trilogy, the latest of which Ninshubar launched recently in August. Emily was the first woman ever to serve as the editor-in-chief. There it is, Ninshubar. So editor-in-chief of New Scientist magazine, and has also worked as a journalist for the Guardian newspaper. Most recently, she has been the science fiction editor or reviewer at New Scientist. Hello, Emily. Welcome to Fantasy and Faith. I hope you're happy to be here. Please tell us.
Sorry. Good morning, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Please tell my audience a little bit more about yourself.
I've been a full-time journalist my whole career. I spent like 1,000 years at the Guardian. I did every job there except sports editor, and I spent 6 years at New Scientist. But I'd always had this dream of writing novels, and I'd started lots of books, got to about 2,000 words, which seemed like a lot to me then, and then abandoned them because it felt too hard. And then when I was in my late 40s, I decided I was going to do it. And began on the road with Inanna, the first of my trilogy. And then once I'd sort of written it and I got a book contract to do 3 of them, I then had the pleasure of being a full-time journalist and a full-time novelist. And eventually it was too much. So I gave up 99.99% of my journalism last year. And now I write full-time novels. But also I have to do some journalism to pay the bills, because book writing isn't incredibly lucrative unless you're, a Lee Child. But anyway.
Thank you for that introduction. So someone who doesn't know you might be confused that why is the former editor-in-chief of New Scientist writing fantasy fiction? But I think you've always had this interest in ancient civilizations and archaeology. How much of that has a bearing on grounding your novel with a physical history of artifacts?
So I have been interested for a long time in, really old stuff, dusty stuff. And I brought that with me to New Scientist. So while I was editor of New Scientist, it was quite full up of loads of stuff about human evolution and, dusty old rocks and stuff like that. So I have always been interested, but I think rather than it starting with artifacts, it started for me with books like Mary Renault's kind of extraordinary books about Greece, and being transported into that magical, as a very keen reader as a girl, being transported into the deep past through novels was what lit up my sort of general interest in archaeology. So it was my love of historical fantasy and science fiction that began me on that journey rather than the objects.
Thank you. So you said you were inspired by books. So I read somewhere that you read the Epic of Gilgamesh or reread the Epic of Gilgamesh, and that inspired you to write Inanna. So what was it about Inanna, a side character from an ancient myth, that made you want to fully realize her as a protagonist?
I was really looking for the project that was going to finally get me to actually writing a novel rather than just dreaming about it and talking about it. And that summer on holiday, I'd read Circe by Madeline Miller. And what she does in that is she obviously centers this side character in the Odyssey, in Homer's Odyssey, which seemed to me, this is before, obviously since then there's been, this kind of massive tidal wave of Greek mythological retellings. But at the time it seemed sort of extraordinary, really fresh and amazing. And then after reading Circe, I did reread the Epic of Gilgamesh and was struck by Inanna. And so at the time, yes, she did seem like a side character. But once I'd then gone down the wormhole into Sumerian and Akkadian literature, I realized that she's like very much main character energy. She's got her own great myths, her descent, her whatever you want to call it, her war against Enki. She's also got a myth where Gilgamesh comes in as a side character, Inanna and the Hulapu tree. So, and then of course I researched her and I realized that she was a primary goddess, or perhaps even a primary god for millennia. And she's the very definition of a main character, just not someone most people have heard of by her original name, Inanna.
Okay. So during the early stages of Inanna, you were still working at New Scientist. How did you manage that balance, and did your journalistic habits influence your fiction writing processes or even your writing voice?
I think that you know what they say about if you want something done quickly, give it to someone who's busy. Um, I sort of scheduled in all my writing time, and I did it. It also wasn't much of a balance really because I would work, you know, all day every weekend day, and I'd work in the evenings. You know, I'd work on Christmas morning before everyone got up. You know, so I was. It wasn't very balanced the scheduling, and I effectively, when I was working full time and doing Inanna, I was kind of working two jobs really. Obviously, at the time, I didn't have an agent or a book thing, so one job was unpaid. Um, the thing that kept me going was it felt so completely thrilling and evolutionary to be writing a novel, and to be learning a kind of radically new set of skills. It was sort of thrilling. And yeah, I was just so delighted to be doing it. It wasn't that I enjoyed every step of it at all. Um, when I sort of took a course at some point in how to write a novel, and a woman called Ingrid Persaud came in and spoke to us about writing her first novel, which I think was called Love After Love or something, very successful. And she said that every second of writing that novel was pure joy to her. And if you didn't feel pure joy the whole time you were writing, what were you doing? And that's definitely not my experience. My experience is that writing is mostly just quite hard, sometimes really grim. And however, I was so thrilled to be doing it. It was only later when I was writing the second novel, Gilgamesh, when it was less fresh and new, that I started to think, wow, this isn't a particularly balanced sort of life, and which I decided eventually to kind of switch to being freelance that I am now. But yes, I definitely, for me, an ongoing part of my terrible process, because my process is the most inefficient, and it's just it's not even a process, but for me, it's key when I'm working on the draft of a book that I do it every day, and I always get up early. I light a candle, which is something that Isabel Allende, obviously very successful, she talks about, like lighting a candle, having fresh flowers and so forth. Obviously, I don't have fresh flowers, but yeah, I treat it like it's the first thing I do in the day. I light my candle, put my coffee machine on, and that first part of the day, every single day, for good or ill, is devoted to my work in progress. Before all the jingle jangle and scrattling of the day has come in to intrude.
So when I spoke to Adrian, he told me he wrote 15 novels before he had the first of the Shadow of Act accepted. How many books did you do you have in your closet
No,
unpublished?
nothing like that. Nothing like that. I started things, but I didn't understand that book writing is meant to feel hard. So I would do like the first, oh, what a great idea. Look at me type. You know, I'd have that first burst of enthusiasm about an idea. And then the minute it got kind of difficult, I'd be like, oh, well, there's nothing in that idea. It's pointless. But I have, from the sort of fragments I've done over the years, I have taken some of those and used them in the Sumerians. One character, Ninshabar, came out of another book entirely. And I'm now writing a science fiction novel, which is a radically different experience from doing these. I don't know, are they historical fantasy with a little bit of sci-fi, I guess.
Mm.
But now I'm doing pure sci-fi, and it feels very, very different. But anyway, over the years, I've done scraps of sci-fi stuff, and I'm, you know, I'm all those. I'm cherry picking from old bits of work for notions, you know, or maybe some characters.
So what was it that triggered you to start to want to write? So which was it a book that you read that really made you want to become a writer?
I think that I was, you know, massive reader growing up. Obviously, these are the days before telly. So I read vociferously as a child. And then when I was at secondary school, I think an older child recommended to me, the journey of Thomas Covenant, the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant. Is it? He's a leper, and he goes
Yeah,
into this
yeah.
fantasy world, sort of escape. And I think that was my sort of first entree into fantasy. And I read things like John Wyndham's work. I really got, and I developed tastes of a kind of teenage boy. I just loved fantasy, stuff like Lord of the Rings, also sort of sailing adventures. And I was good at, English at school, and I won poetry prizes, but I ended up going down a science route and becoming a journalist, and then becoming a journalist who specialized in science. And that bit of me that loved, kind of creative worlds and sort of windows into the past, all that bit of me was only satisfied then by reading. But I still always had this feeling in me that it was something I wanted to explore deeply. So I'm really glad I have, because it's such a kind of massive and interesting experience, as I'm sure you know, to try and create art. And it's a great privilege to be able to try to do that. And whether your art is jazz, painting, cooking, some kind of theoretical physical theorem, whatever your art is, it's a huge evolutionary thing for you to do, I think. And so interesting for your brain, and a kind of new training for your brain. And the more you try to be creative, the more your brain cooperates.
So going, yeah. So going back to your process again, did you use any particular kind of software to help you schedule, or was it just blocking out your calendar?
No, no, I'm not like a great software person. No, I would literally just be like 5 a.m. to 7 a.m. write book, and I'd put that in my diary for the year every day. So no, there was no
Yeah.
software stuff. And I got a writing group from this course I did at Faber and Faber, called Faber Academy. And in that group, they all, they'd try like Scrivener and all these kind of different things, but I'd sort of buy them and then be unable to use them. And so I've just stuck with my trusty Word documents.
Talking a bit about your new book, Ninshaba. She's a fierce, self-assured warrior with a strong moral compass. What real life or literary inspirations informed her creation, and what does she represent to you thematically?
Well, so Ninshaba was born because when I set off to write Inanna, without wanting to ruin it, but the main myth about Inanna means that she's out of action for a while. And because I'd written a novel before, I hadn't thought very deeply about things like point of view and who's telling the story, and the staggering significance of point of view. But I found myself with Inanna out of action, and I realized I needed someone else's point of view, someone else to tell the story. And it made perfect sense that Inanna's right-hand woman, her holy sukul, her number two, Ninshaba, would be the person to pick up the story. And at that point, I realized I needed to lean into Ninshaba as a character. In the original Sumerian myths and Akkadian myths, Ninshaba is, she has a kind of heroic role, but there's no personal information about her at all. I think once she's called a queen from the east. There's this like, but there's basically nothing. So that's when I went back to a book I never wrote, where I'd started this story of a young woman who's driven out of her land and kind of walks across the world. It's meant to be set in 60,000 BC. It's the story of, I'm really interested in human evolution. It's the story of one of the first sort of modern humans to come out of Africa. So I repurposed that woman to be Ninshaba. And the reason I felt it fitted, it was nice to have someone in the trilogy who's coming in from the outside world where people are still living as hunter-gatherers, going into ancient Sumer where they already have cities of 50,000 people, and going, this is weird. And so she was sort of working on those levels. And then sometimes when you write novels, as I'm sure you know, there are certain characters who just stand up and dominate. And they have a life of their own. And Ninshaba ultimately was that person. And at times, I wondered if the book should all be about her, but luckily it became a trilogy. So in the end, she did get her name on a book, as she deserves. And for lots of readers, she is their favorite character.
Who's your favorite character then out of the three that you've written?
It's really difficult. Gilgamesh is kind of super fun to write because he's because he's badly behaved, because he's trouble, but ultimately really heroic. So I enjoyed Gilgamesh, and it's also it's quite fun, like writing from a man's perspective as a woman, like just having that extra challenge. Another favorite of mine, well, I mean, obviously Ninja is a favorite, is Gilgamesh has got a sidekick called Haga, and Haga was developed because I needed someone for Gilgamesh to chat to when he's sort of standing on siege walls, and King Akka and his armies coming over the horizon, and I need someone to, like initially this is how he was born. I needed someone to just give Gilgamesh a spear, and I needed Gilgamesh to make comments to someone, and who is it going to be? So I just had this rando guy, and I called him Haga. And then over the course of the 3 books, Haga became a real person for me, and I really love Haga as well. And he and Gilgamesh have a very bickering, fractious, difficult relationship, which again it's like great fun to write. Yeah, but they've all gone now. Sad. It's over.
So your novels are steeped in Mesopotamian landscape and ritual life. How did you build the physical and cultural world of Sumer from fragmentary sources? And what was your most surprising discovery during your research?
I mean, all of it's surprising, really. I mean, ancient Sumer, the world's, I'm doing bunny ears because, of course, how do you define civilization? But if you went to Uruk in about 3,500 BC, 5,500 years ago, so that's almost 3,000 years before the oldest bit of Homer that we've got. If you went to Uruk then, they had the wheel, the potter's wheel, as well as the cart wheel. They had money, divorce. They had writing. They had the beginning of literature, so the world's first writing that we know of. They had markets and long-distance trade and ships, and you would recognize it completely as a city of the world. And astronomy, science, all these things all seem to begin in this kind of quite small place between the Euphrates and the Tigris. So it is super surprising on every level. This place that, as far as we know, is the barrier between what we call prehistory and history, and it all happening in this one place. So it's all pretty surprising. So to recreate it, I did sometimes I'd like interview an Assyriologist, or they've got different names, or an expert in ancient Sumer, and I'd say, what was it like there? And they were, I don't know, haven't thought about it. So I read scientific papers. What kind of animals did they have? The literature is fantastic, and the not just the sort of myths, but also the kind of day-to-day stuff that's preserved in cuneiform tablets gives you a really good idea about what people were trading, what they ate, the general vibe, even in the Epic of Gilgamesh, stuff's really well explained, the kind of beds they're lying on, lots of the physical stuff. We've got objects from the city of in the British Museum. So I looked at all those a lot. I read, I think I said this in another interview, but I read Wilfrid Thesiger, who's a kind of old world colonial explorer, I guess. And he went into and did books about the marsh Arabs, as he called them. And there you get very visceral sense of him in this kind of wilderness that also plays host to these incredibly sophisticated people. And there, you'd say, oh yeah, there's loads of mosquitoes. Of course, there are loads of mosquitoes. There's loads of frogs. These are the sounds of the place. So I just scratched it all together. But ultimately, I made it up. Because that's the only way you can do it if you're doing a novel, is to essentially eventually go, this is what I think it was like. And then you just lean into people looking out over the Euphrates, and you just kind of, you've got to lean in. So to your sort of fantasy of it.
So in Inanna, you have the gods as almost like ancient aliens. So that was like a sci-fi element. So how do you see the convergence of fantasy, myth, speculative science fiction in your work, especially given your background as a science fiction reviewer?
Yeah. So a lot of this, so yeah, what is sci-fi is so interesting. Um, Adrian Tchaikovsky, who I know, sorry if I've got the sun in my face, I'll just sit back. Adrian Tchaikovsky, who I know you interviewed on this podcast, and he has this, he kind of has it as a sliding scale. And on the one end, you've got weird stuff happens, oh, it's magic, and that's fantasy. And at the other end, you've got, oh, weird stuff happens, it's science. And then between it's science and it's magic, there's this sort of sliding scale. I also think that you can sort of argue the same for what's the difference between historical fiction and historical fantasy. So when Mary Renault wrote her astounding trilogy about Alexander the Great, Fire from Heaven, The Persian Boy, and is it Funeral Games, the last one? So those are seen as a great work of historical fiction, and they are very scholarly, and her work was amazing. But ultimately, she did make up what it was like. They're still fantasy, and so I guess what I'm trying to say is that what genre you're writing in, it's all very conditional, and the main thing needs to be that for the reader it feels cohesive and that it feels in step with what they were thinking they were going to get from genre. So in the Sumerians, I did have the gods coming from other realms, which hints at sort of from other worlds. But I in the end, I kind of reined back from making it to sci-fi because I felt I already had quite a lot going on. I had a whole Sumerian pantheon and lots of different characters and cities. I didn't really need to be getting too much into, But with the genre thing, as a sci-fi reviewer, lots of things are sent to me and called sci-fi, but they're the divide between what if it's on another world but it's fantasy, is that sci-fi because it's on another world, like June? That was just on another world, but it's a fantasy, but we call it sci-fi. So it's really hard. And a lot of speculative stuff is just sort of set in the future, or it's about the world where one thing's changed. And is that sci-fi? And then a lot of other sci-fi it's just a normal detective story, but it's set on a spaceship. Does that make it sci-fi? So I worry over that sort of thing a lot because every 3 weeks I review a piece of science fiction, and I only want to give positive reviews because I want to support writers, not clumps. I'm always looking for something that in my heart and mind counts as sci-fi.
There seems to be a lot of genre crossovers these days as well. So it's become muddy waters. Um, do you think this is the direction that genre fiction is going, where there's going to be a lot of crossover?
I don't know, because I wonder if there's always been uh, there's the definition of what sci-fi has always been pretty wide. If you what I personally don't like is when one particular genre is kind of reimagined by putting it in a different location, like putting it in space. For me, anyway, I think genre's always been more blurred than people realize, and definitely modern audiences are super tolerant of of crossovers and kind of fresh imagining. So yes, yes.
So going back to Inanna, Inanna evolves across 1,000 years into Ishtar, Aphrodite, and Venus. How does this theme of transformation of names, stories, mythic identity influence your storytelling and your personal sense of legacy?
Mm. I'm going to show you my this is my Star of Ishtar, or Inanna. It's the same thing. It's her main symbol. It's an 8-pointed star. Anyway, whatever. Um, uh, so yes, so Inanna gets renamed at some point in history. She's probably a prehistoric goddess because the stories about her don't require cities. They're all about, if you think about her kind of descending into the darkness, caves, trees, family, politics, none of it requires cities. So it's fairly likely that when she starts popping up in imagery and in writing and say, let's say, the mid 3000s BC, that she's already a goddess who we've carried with us through prehistory, before writing. She could be very old indeed. She could, she could be very old, and her stories could be very old. One of the scholars I spoke to about Inanna said that there's a theory that she explains the strange movements of the planet Venus, which is something that you'd want explained a long, long time before cities. At some point, she's renamed Ishtar, and basically Ishtar is Inanna, and she goes forward. And Ishtar, I think, is a lot more famous than Inanna, but it is Inanna. There's not that much difference. And then later parts of Inanna Ishtar seem to reappear, for example, in Greek classical myths, with Aphrodite, and then later with the Romans with Venus, although they're not. It's not the whole of Inanna that kind of persists through history, and it's thought that she probably, or aspects of her, were still being worshipped and was sort of 600-700 AD, so kind of post Christianity, and they were last holdouts. So it's just astounding to me that this goddess, who I didn't really understand any of the origins of. I mean, obviously I'd heard of Aphrodite. She's arguably the longest known named deity in recorded human history. And most people don't know her story. So it felt, yeah, like such a privilege and so interesting and satisfying to research her and kind of even in only my own way, in my own vibe, to resurrect her in this way. And obviously, there's a long history of people taking kind of very ancient figures and reimagine them in the for a modern audience. So yeah, it's been really interesting and satisfying. Don't know if I answered your question there.
Yeah, you kind of did. So for my degree dissertation, I wrote about how modern mythology is just the retelling of old stories. So this idea that there was an original story that we've just retold again and again and again, which kind of fits with what you just said about Inanna, and indeed with the Epic of Gilgamesh. Um, and what I was suggesting in my dissertation, I was only 21 at the time, so you have to give me a little rope. I suggested that modern fantasy fiction or speculative fiction is our attempts to try to recapture some of that original mythology that was around in the earliest times, to express this effort to understand what our place in the universe is, where did we come from, and what is it that we've been made for. Um, just throwing that out there.
Yeah, no,
So
I mean, those
you've
are things.
described,
Those are universally interesting things, aren't they? Which you could imagine us sitting around campfires 100,000 years ago and listening to stories that try to explain that. You can see that we've had that with us for a really long time. Yeah.
so going back to your writing, you've said it's exhausting and emphasized structured daily discipline. How do you cultivate creativity within that framework? And what's your approach to navigating those demanding ugly first drafts? Or don't you have ugly first drafts?
So on the creativity, thanks to the fact we can now image brains, um, there's sort of two basic modes of how your brain is, and one is sort of a bit daydreamy, just sort of looking out the window. And then one is executive function. I'm going to get up and I'm going to do this podcast, I'm going to do these emails, and I'm going to go, go, go. And they're quite antagonistic modes. You can see one is dreamy and one is like bang, bang, bang. And the only time both these bits of the brain turn on at the same time is when you're being creative. So you can see, in thanks to neuroscientists, you can actually see the brain, both these bits of the brain light up when people are making jazz, writing a novel, working on their physics theorem. They're antagonistic bits of the brain. And I think that's why it can be tiring to be kind of absolutely in that zone making stuff up, which is the bit that's required in jazz or in novel writing. But the more you return to that state, kind of switching on, the two bits to make it creative, the more proficient your brain becomes at it. And so I think that's why that sort of daily discipline and returning to it is so valuable, because in the old days, people used to think some people are creative, some people aren't. But I think the brain science shows that people can become more creative by practicing getting into that creative mode. But I really can feel how tiring that is. So I can do a session of that, and then I just have to have, in order to sort of protect my creativity or whatever, I just have to sort of walk away for a bit, put some washing on, do something completely different and physical, and have a walk the dog or whatever, to kind of decompress from that. And then by the time I get back to my computer, I'm ready to go back into that place. So when I say very tiring, that's what I mean. It's just I can't sustain it. And I know some people sort of talk about going into this zone and being in it for 8 hours or whatever, and that's amazing. But I find I have to have quite frequent breaks, and just to clear that feeling and then kind of go back in. The other things I think that are important for creativity is for your life not to be that exciting. The more full up your life is with thrilling adventures and loads of people and sort of drama and stuff, I think that although that's so wonderful and enriching, the book probably, or whatever project you're doing, is probably helped by having a much more humdrum way of life for periods anyway, and to try and kind of cut down how much you're away and how many people you cooked in, just to cool it all down. And sorry, this is a bit of a long answer, but it's something I thought about a lot. Is I think that having a walk every day is quite profound, if you are able to walk, is quite profound and important for our kind of 7 million years of human evolution. We've walked a lot every day until the last very short period of time. And I think it is enormously, even if you don't have a single interesting thought for that half an hour, getting away like that kind of repetitive motion, I think it encourages your brain to be working for you behind the scenes all the time. When you're not at the computer trying to create, your brain, it allows your brain to kind of do a lot of heavy lifting. And so sometimes when I'm on my dog walk, just one thing might come to me, or I might wake up in the night and something's come, like try and remember to write that down. So I think nurturing your creativity is like a massive, big deal. What was the second part of your question again?
What's your approach to navigating those demanding, ugly first drafts?
I find that really hard, because there's this sort of, you're always advised, aren't you, to sort of get to the end, and at least you've got something. And I think that's great advice. I think if you get to the end of a draft, even if it's terrible, you're very likely to be a person who will write, if you're writing novels, if you can get to the end of the first draft And also, if you accept that you may have to do many more, those two things are important. Because people who just write a draft and go finished, that's not going to work. So yeah, I really strongly believe in getting the draft down, however ugly. But for me, the process isn't always smooth. So it's not like I go, oh, I do a really ugly draft, and then the next one's just that bit nicer, and then I go up through the levels. What I can do is like terrible first draft, work on it, work on it, work on it, get someone to read it, realize it's terrible, rewrite the whole book, replot it again. It's just like it's big. It's just not like going up through the levels in a neat, orderly, efficient manner. I think with Ninja Bar, I went quite a long way down the road. I got one of my kids to read it. He was like, yeah, I like it, but I don't like the whole Ninja Bar strand, which is about 40,000 words. I was like, when you get criticism and you know it's right, it's like, oh. So pretty much rewrote that whole book much later in the process than you'd hope. With my current sci-fi, because I write kind of beginning to end organically and intuitively rather than plotting it all out. And trying to do that with the science fiction is it's quite hard actually, and it's meant that I've been going around those doing more ugly first drafts than again you'd hope, because I keep realizing that I need to go in deeper and deeper in the plot, because of course with pure science fiction rather than fantasy, it has to feel real. And so even if you've got these kind of plot points strung out and go, I'll do that, until you've actually tried to write them, you don't really know if it's going to really, really work when you do write it. So yes, so the answer is I deal with it all badly and inefficiently.
So, do you do a lot of research before you start writing and then worry about the plot afterwards, or do you do your research alongside writing?
So with the Sumerians, I had the so it's a good thing and a bad thing. I had some plot points that I had to stick to because they were in the myth. So I had to get, say, Gilgamesh from here to there because I need him to turn up on the other side of the world to look for an immortality drug, whatever. So there's no detail in the myths about how he's going to get from one place to another. So I kind of make all that up, characters, making everything up as I go along. But I know where I'm going. I've got a lighthouse across the sea. And with the whole trilogy, I knew ultimately there's this big, let's just call it Mesopotamian creation myth called Enuma Elish. And I knew that creation myth would ultimately provide me with an architecture, very, very loose for the whole trilogy. So I had somewhere to go to. And the good thing about it was it kind of narrowed down my options, because when you're writing a novel, you've got infinite options, haven't you? But this narrowed them down. That was sort of helpful. On the other hand, a lot of the myths are so contradictory and so completely insane, that I was trying to hit marks and trying to explain stuff happening where it didn't really make any sense. And that was like a big struggle with it. Like, why do these characters do these crazy things? And how do I make that feel really real in this book? So now that I'm doing sci-fi, I have no constraints. I've got a million options. I think arguably, probably all books are really difficult, and they're just difficult in different ways. So that's where I am currently. I think that if I did another sci-fi, I think I would spend a lot longer researching in advance rather than doing it as I'm going along, which I'm doing this time. I think for character development, you need to have an organic process, and you need to kind of, I think for characters to work, personally, I think you can't just like kind of bash them out in the service of the plot. That's not going to work. Yeah, sorry, I've just rambled on, but yeah, I don't think that everyone's got their own way of doing things, haven't they? And for me, there's sort of no good way. It's just how it is. And Ninchubar, these first books, her motto is one step and then the next, which is the kind of hunter's motto. She comes from a kind of hunting culture, and so for me, that's what books are like. I just have to, when I get anxious or I'm worried it's not working or have I made the right choices, I know the answer is always just to go back and do some work, because there's no other way of making things better other than to get back to the work. Apart from sometimes, particularly with sci-fi, to talk to someone about the plot point that you've got and you're worried about, which I didn't do with the Sumerians, but I can see with sci-fi, it's actually quite good if I've got one of my main characters an AI, it's actually quite good to talk to someone who knows loads about artificial intelligence. So I see why people in sci-fi collaborate more. Okay, that's a long answer, sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, this might annoy you, but Adrian, he does all of his research and plotting beforehand, and then he says his first draft is pretty much his last draft as well, because he doesn't change it all that much
Yeah.
after the first draft.
Well, he has said also that he's experimented a bit recently with writing organically. I mean, yeah, I mean, Adrian Tchaikovsky is annoying because he's producing these fantastic books, 5,000 a year or whatever. And yeah, of course, he is annoying. That is annoying. I think, though, that he's uh, there's some sci-fi writers particularly who are kind of going into it science first, and so a good example is Adrian's Shroud book, which was published earlier this year, and people kind of go and land on this dark moon, and it's got this kind of amazing biology. And so for him, with his sort of biological background, he's worked out this universe in advance, and then he drops his characters in. So I think he's come science first rather than character first. And I think I'm more instinctively character first, create the science later, if you see what I mean. Just as in who I am. And I think the Sumerians are kind of, they're character first rather than myth first or anything else, if you see what I mean. So I suspect I'm always going to be caught in this. This is always what it's going to be. You know, character first is, it's going to be messy and organic.
Yeah. So I started off with my first book was 6 drafts, and a lot of rewrites in between, taking out whole sub stories, subplots, and then adding new subplots in there. So it was exhausting. But over my writing career, I've kind of fine tuned it a bit more. So my second book was, I think, 4 drafts, and hopefully my next 3 are gonna be 3 drafts maximum. It's because you don't have time to really spend that much time on each book, because the market keeps moving on, and you might have a good idea to, oh, this will work really, really well right now, but by the time you finished it, 2, 3 years have passed. I mean, my first one took 10 years to get to a point where I thought, yes, this is ready. So yeah. So you cited momentum, tough critiques, and structured writing as critical to finishing your first novel. What guidance do you have for aspiring writers juggling creative ambitions with demanding jobs for life responsibilities?
I would say that even half an hour a day, you know, obviously it's difficult if you've got like a newborn baby or something, but if you can take from 6:30 to 7 every day, and in that time write 300 words or whatever, if that's what you can do, then do that. And I can't do the maths without looking it up, but then over the course of, what's 365 times 300? Can you do the maths? Whatever that is.
A lot.
A lot over the course of the year. You'll have many, many words. And also by having that daily discipline, you'll have turned the creative machine on so that your brain will start to produce ideas outside. I don't think you necessarily need much time. It's just that little piece of daily discipline to turn on the brain, to turn on your creative engine, and to get used to doing that. I think you can. I know people who have written a tiny amount every day with very young children, full-time jobs, and have produced lots and lots of work that way. If you can find it in yourself to do that, you could go a really long way.
Thank you. And now that the trilogy is complete, what do you see yourself working on next? You've mentioned you're thinking of doing something more science fictiony. So,
Oh
do you
no,
see any thematic through lines?
I am
On?
already. I'm under contract to write. I am writing a science fiction novel, which hasn't been announced. Announced. That sounds posh, but you know what I mean. Like it hasn't been publicized yet. And I'm due to deliver my science fiction novel on December the 1st. So, in book terms, like really soon. And there are some, because it's me, there's a little bit of ancient archaeological stuff, but I'm trying to write the kind of sci-fi that I would love, that I grew up loving. Do you read any sci-fi?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I love, like,
I've,
classic,
yeah.
your Ian M. Banks, or, in recent years, I've loved like Anne Leckie's stuff, Ancillary Justice, up to Translation State. So I'm trying to write like a delicious, yummy sci-fi of the kind that I would like to read and review. But as with all these things, it is much harder to do yourself than to criticize other people's efforts. So yeah, it's been a big change from doing the historical fantasy.
What else do you have going on that you'd like to share with the audience?
I'm my hobby is that it's quite weird. Is that I collect prehistoric stone tools from the ground, from the fields, and I've been doing that for 20 years. And I just put together a book proposal for a non-fiction book. It sounds boring, but I would make it not boring. About the people who go out on the land and kind of collect these, like, it's all this treasure just sitting out there, and because it's not gold or silver, people just walk past it. They just see pebbles, but actually you've got these. Earlier this year, I found, but my husband picked up an axe that turned out to be 300,000 years old, just up here behind my house. So that's I've got that going on, and that's quite. I mean, it may not be commissioned, it may go nowhere, but I'm interested in the challenge of writing a non-fiction book. Yes, I think that would be quite interesting, and if I do it, it will mean I'll travel to lots of different prehistoric sites and meet lots of cool archaeologists and so on and so forth. So I've got that as well as which I've just been working on last week.
That genuinely sounds fun. Are you going out to any conventions this year as well, where people can come and meet you?
Yeah, I'm going to. Is it World Fantasy Convention in Brighton?
Okay, excellent.
It's October. Are you going?
October. I'm not going this year, but I'm hoping to be next year's FantasyCon.
Yeah, so it's in Brighton. I can't remember if it's called FantasyCon or World FantasyCon. And I filled in. If you want to be a participant, you have to fill in a form. But I haven't heard back yet. But I hope so. I hope I will get like a panel or something. I went to WorldCon in Glasgow last year. Have you been to WorldCon?
I've never been to a WorldCon yet. I mean, I've only just restarted writing after a stint doing research. Writing my dissertation took over my life for the last 6 years. So now that that's out of the way, I'm refocusing on my writing again.
Well, I really love
Well,
WorldCon.
Emily, I was about to say thank you for coming on the podcast. I've really enjoyed our conversation this morning. And with that, I'll end the podcast. And thank you for listening to everyone out there. Keep dreaming, keep writing, and let your stories shine.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.